Thank you so much for being here. It's a hard day, but it's also a day intended to be a memorial and a celebration. And we'll start with a song that was requested by Dad, or loved by Dad at least. Go ahead. Yeah. Thank you. I'm here. The mic is here.
Can't hear you.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll speak up for everyone here. My name is Kelly, to some of you. I'm Keith's son. Usually I would be happy to be standing up there and speaking loudly at you, but I don't really trust myself to not read at least some of it today. Thank you for being here with my mom and wife and family. Appreciate all of you being here, family and friends who are family, colleagues. Really do appreciate you being here to help remember and celebrate Keith Saxton's life. This week, I learned that eulogies are hard. They are supposed to be some magic concentration and summation of a person's life, poignant and touching and clean and final. And it doesn't work that way. Our lives aren't easily summed up. As a storyteller, I look at our lives as just a tangle of stories. We are all the stories that we live. We are all the stories that we touch. And so I'd like to share some of those stories that I heard from my dad, I heard of my dad. We'll have some more music. And then if any of you have anything you want to share, there will be a time for that as well. 1,000 years ago, more than 1,000 years ago, an anonymous Norwegian wrote a verse that loosely translated goes something like this. Everything dies. Families die, and you yourself will die just the same. I only know one thing that doesn't die, the story of the one who has died. Dad was brought home from the hospital as an infant to a log cabin. I don't know if any of you knew that or not. Frank and Fern, his parents, brought him home to an elder brother, Leroy, on a small ranch in Sand Creek, northwest Nebraska. Dad talked about that ranch a lot, and I think it stayed with him his whole life. He talked about what his day was like there as a young person. He lived there till he was 12 or so. And he talked about how he would get up early in the morning, help milk the cows, turn out the chickens, scatter some grain, If they had a hog or a lamb that needed watering and fed, he would do that all before he got into his school clothes and walked 1.5 miles, or as us kids used to say, at least 5 miles uphill both ways in the snow. Which was funny because when we finally went to go see the school one day, it's actually across a valley, so he really did walk uphill both ways. He would be at school till about 4, and then he would come home and start chores again. And he talked about how it was his job to go get the firewood. Don't forget the small wood for the kitchen fire. Don't forget the pitch wood to make it easier for Grandma to start. Don't forget the big pieces for the heater to keep the cabin warm all night long. When he was a little older, he and his brother actually moved into the barn. So he did grow up in a barn. So when his mom yelled at him, "Were you born in a barn?" he could say, "No, but I live there." Ranch life was, as Dad said, everything that was talked about over the dinner table. When friends visited, that's what they talked about. Even after the family left the ranch and moved into town, that's what his mind. He spent summers going back to the people who had rented his family's farm to help with the haying in the summer. When it was sold, he helped others. When he was 17, he started work for the Soil Conservation Service, which began his career, very long career, with the federal government, but he was still working on ranches locally to help them put conservation practices into place. He did talk about how he thinks that overwhelming presence of ranch life influenced his career, his life path. He got a bachelor's in agricultural engineering, a master's in civil engineering, and a PhD in agricultural engineering. And so in some ways, ranch life just never left him, and he never left it. He did have his own family. My sister is 7 years older than me. Can't be here today, but in spirit. And she was born in Madison when Dad was doing his master's work there. I was born in Columbia when Dad was doing his PhD work in Ames, Iowa. But through that whole time, he worked first for the Soil Conservation Service and then as an ag engineer for the USDA, which is technically what he did until 1999. So that's a long career as an ag engineer. Me, as a kid, I saw a piece of paper once. I don't know what it was, but it was some formal piece of paper dealing with his job. And underneath agricultural engineer, it said infiltration specialist. Now, for those of you who don't know much about my dad's career, his PhD work, and actually a lot of his work, was all about how water gets into the soil, stays, leaves, depending on the soil. That was the kind of infiltration they were talking about. But, you know, as an 8-year-old kid, that meant my dad was a super spy. But in fact, what he was doing was every bit as important. Gavin was just showing us that an article got published this week. Is that right? That includes a video of Dad talking about the cross-lot drill. When we were driving across the state on Friday, there were several fields that were using no-till farming methods that Dad helped promote in this part of the country and around the world. Oh, I'm going to scroll up here for a minute here. Yeah.
They say the volume.
Is the volume here too low? This is off and on only, so I'll try to move it up a little closer. Is the lav mic working okay? Oh, all right, we're doing okay. All right. We'll try to. Is that better for the folks who are here? All right, we'll do that. So we were in the Midwest for the longest time as a family, and Dad, Mom said, always had the thought of going west. He wouldn't be the first. His older brother Leroy lived in Lewiston here. His younger brother Bill was still there in Nebraska. But when Dad got the opportunity, he came out here to Pullman. It was nice having family just 45 minutes away. And I will have to say that Dad and his older brother spent quite a lot of time gleefully dragging us in and out of all sorts of troubles and joys. We tore down giant old barns to build up new houses and siding. We played around with horses and raising cattle, and still the ranch life was with Dad. Dad was, as a lot of you know, maybe most content, or at least most applied when he was in a garden. He had a way about approaching growing things that was both engineered, rational, logical, but also intuitive and maybe a little bit magical. Somebody was mentioning earlier that they were upset that they could never get tomatoes going when Dad already had a full bounty sitting up next to the wall. He also had an orchard at the house that he and Mom built on Sunnyside Hill and enjoyed that every bit as much, and the produce that came from it. But he wasn't just here at home. He traveled a lot. He liked to say that he traveled enough to go around the world twice. He was instrumental in setting up international ag programs in both India and China, both in dryland farming. And he traveled not only for work, but for pleasure, for family. He and Mom took a trip with an elderly aunt to reconnect with Mom's family in the Czech Republic. Traveled Europe, went to Australia for a year's sabbatical. And through all that, he brought back stories. And I was impressed upon by him that a lot of his stories were not about the places that he went, but about the people. And I remember him being very impacted, disturbed even, after he came back from Morocco, where he saw both extreme wealth and extreme poverty literally across the street from each other. He liked to talk about his travels, but I think he just liked to see the world. And I hope that whatever comes next for him, his travels are ever broader. We're here in person. We are here in spirit. There are a lot of people watching this on video, and we welcome you. And I'd like to take a moment of quiet reflection while we have another piano song. And then if you have anything that you would like to speak up and say, I'll come back after the piano and we'll pass the microphone around for that. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to sit down on you.
These chairs are small. Good job.
Thanks. I guess I didn't give enough signal. I do have one more story I'm going to share before I start everyone off. I do have one more story I'm going to share before I start folks off. So before I open it up, if any of you have anything you'd like to add, there is one story. It's actually two stories that absolutely has to be shared. For those of you who know, Mom and Dad are just a few days away from their 66th anniversary. And knew each other before that as high school sweethearts. So if you asked them how they met, there are multiple stories. Dad and his brothers wrote a book some years ago, and Dad waxed on and on about how his father, my grandfather, had bought an old Willys Jeep, and how Dad would take Mom out on fishing trips in that Jeep with barely any heater and a rag top that leaked cold air, and how he charmed my mother with fishing trips in a Jeep. You may not be surprised to know that when you ask my mom how they met and became a couple, it's a different story that includes nothing about fishing trips or a Jeep. If you ask my mom, you get a very lovely, sweet story about a young lady sitting on the edge of a pond after a day of ice skating who asked the sweet, bright-eyed boy if he wouldn't please help take her skates off. And I'm sure there was some fluttering of eyelashes and some laughing, but there was no fishing involved. There was no cold, heaterless car involved. I like them both. I think both stories are every bit as true, and I think both stories honor their relationship for all these years. Does anyone have anything they'd like to add this afternoon? Gavin, you want to? Why don't you just come up here, Gavin, and use this microphone?
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. My name's Gavin Porter, and as you can tell, I'm not originally from around these parts. But way back in 2009, August 2009, I was given the task out of New Zealand of coming up here to crank up the marketing for Crosslot. We were baking no tillage in those days. And because of the work that Keith had done, it was decided that we should establish ourselves here in Pullman. So I flew in, I think it was a Tuesday, with 2 bags, suitcases, and rented a car and drove from Spokane to Pullman. And was welcomed to Keith and Mary Lou's home for the night. I was only there for one night before I had to fly out to meet our chief executive, John Baker, over in Chicago. But by the time I got back on Friday, Keith had organised an apartment for me, and their next door neighbours had been moving down to Clarkston and wanted to get rid of some furniture. And so I ended up with half the furniture already in this apartment when I got back from Chicago. So what I wanted to say about the story about Keith is that there's a little bit of a dark, sinister side that you need to know about the man. That smile there is can be quite devious sometimes. But over the year, well, not over the years, within weeks, we had developed a really, really good working relationship, and Keith and Mary Lou were just absolutely fantastic in welcoming me to the region. And if you've ever had the pleasure of being able to go up in the old days to 1250 Campus View Road for dinner, you were going to get one of the best meals in your life. But Keith had another idea as well, is that he would always like to get me a little bit liquored up as well. And after a big meal and a few glasses of wine, he would say, let's go downstairs and play a little bit of pool. Well, clearly, he had had a little bit of a misspent youth somewhere, because he was the most difficult guy in the world to play pool against. He could work the angles out like nobody's business. However, I wasn't too bad myself, but there was always one rule at the end of the game when the black ball was on the table. You could not pop that ball straight, hit it straight into a hole. You had to bank that ball off a side, then into the hole to win the game. Now, I don't know how many games or how many dinners we had and how many games of pool we had, but it took a while before I finally beat him. Another fantastic story. As you can see, I'm no spring chicken. And as Kelly said, Keith loved his garden and he loved his fruit trees. And every time they would, over summer, they would drive usually south down to back through towards Nebraska. And because he'd got my apartment only just over the road a bit, my job was to go and water and look after the garden and make sure over summer it had plenty of water, so that those tomatoes were in really, really good shape. Then towards the end of the summer, I'd get a call. Gav, you better come up. The fruit is ready. If you want some fruit, you better come up. Well, the reason behind that was, and as you can see, I'm not a spring chicken. I was the one who had to climb the tree to pick the last of the cherries or the apples and what have you. So he'd be standing below with the bucket. Mary Lou would be there with the phone with 911 on fast dial in case I fell out of the tree and fell onto Keith. So that was some of the fantastic stories that I've enjoyed with the friendship and the hospitality of both Keith and Mary Lou, and just absolutely fabulous. On a more professional note, I just want you to understand how Keith, through his work at WSU, is going to make a huge difference globally in world food production. You know, there's an old saying in life, you've got to put a spade in the ground to grow a tree. Well, we've had a few spades in the ground to grow those trees, but we're now getting to a point where over the next 12 months we will be significantly contributing to global food production. And to the extent that, you know, I regret I only found out about Keith on Thursday when I made a call to Mary Lou, and so I managed to get a flight up from Mississippi yesterday, and I thought, well, there are people who need to know about what's going on here, and I rang up our old friend Frank Lessiter from No Till Farmer, and he kindly published a very significant article in No Till Farmer yesterday, along with a video of Keith and some of the stuff that he had done, which is absolutely fantastic. But more importantly, I don't want his legacy to ever be lost on us. And so what we're going to do at Crosslot next year is we're going to set up a little wee Keith Saxton No Till Farmer Foundation scholarship. And what I want to do with that will be sort of based along the same lines as the Nuffield Scholarship in England, where we will allow young farmers the opportunity to put a business case, if you like, to us, and then we will sponsor their travel, not completely around the world, but to different parts of the world, so they can learn a little bit more about what's going on in the no-till arena. And I want that to be under Keith's name because of his contribution and the work that he did here in Washington and Pullman, so that nobody forgets. So, but yeah, I had fantastic memories. I had 7 years here in Pullman before I moved east. I was only supposed to be here for 3 years, burnt through two, H-1B visas. Then you have to get a green card, and the dopey guys gave me a green card as well, so I'm still here. But I will never ever forget the hospitality, the generosity of both Mary Lou and Keith while I was here. We had a lot of fun times, a lot of barbecues, a lot of drinking wine and beer and what have you. So, but anyway, that's it. His legacy is going to live for a long, long time, and we'll make sure that he does. He's just, both Mary Lou and Keith, fantastic people. So thank you.
Thanks, Gavin, so much. Cool. Gavin, I just want to say two things to follow up. One, the the scholarship and foundation is amazing, and thank you so much. And two, I really hate to tell you that that rule in pool was only ever for you. I played a lot of pool games with Dad. I've watched a lot of games played. My sisters played a lot of games. The grandkids played some games. I think you're the only one he ever applied that rule to. So I just thought you should probably know that, and I'm sure he would want you to know that now. Anyone else have something they'd like to add? Yeah, please. Do you want to come up here, or you want to speak from there?
I better come out.
Okay.
My name is Everett Martin, and I was an animal scientist and
Here,
knew
this one.
Keith well, having visited Smith Ag Engineering plenty of times to see what was going on. And we had something in common. We both shared an interest in old antique tractors. And he was a member of the Lewis Clark Antique Power Club for several years. And I believe his intent was to bring the family Model R Minneapolis Moline
Correct.
to Pullman. And that didn't work out, and for some reason, and he decided to donate that tractor to the University of Nebraska Tractor Museum, known as the Larson Museum. And you can look that up online and scroll through, and the most beautiful tractor in the museum is that Model R Minneapolis Moline. I've corresponded with the director of the museum, and he says the students get it out every fall and use it in a parade. And, I can't think of a better tribute to Keith
I agree.
at the University of Nebraska on the Ag campus. If you're ever through Lincoln, stop by there and you can visit the Saxton Model R Moline. One other thing that's kind of cute, I think, the Lewis Clark Antique Power Club has traditional or old-fashioned plow days occasionally. And the Morgan family, north of Colfax, has hosted that for many years. And one year Keith was over there to observe, and I got him on a tractor with a breaking plow and took pictures of him plowing 8 inches deep in the loose soil. He admitted it was a little bit sacrilegious, and he threatened to destroy my camera. But, when I find that picture,
I would like that, yeah.
Yeah, I'll get that to you. And I'll pass this along in case you're interested in the address for the director of the museum.
Great, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. In case you're wondering why I'm hovering, it's so that we can pick everything up on the mic that's here on my suit. So I'm not trying to crowd you off the stage, just trying to get that done. That tractor was a story in and of itself. That tractor was his dad's tractor that was pulled as a wreck off the old ranch and took 3 years, I think 3 years of hard work by an individual in Nebraska to bring it from an absolute derelict to a pristine, could have rolled off the lot tractor. Anna, you got to ride it. We took it shortly after it was done. We took it for, 50 loops around the building just to make sure. It did a couple of runs in the Crawford 4th of July parade before it went off to the museum, and I'm very happy to hear that it still gets drug out every fall and drove through the parade. It's where it should be. Anyone else have something they'd like to add? Yeah, come on. I'm going to hover for you.
So as I get older, I find I don't remember stories as well as I used to, but they certainly keep getting better and better and better. And so one story I swear happened, I'm pretty sure happened, was that Kelly and I were reading an old Calvin and Hobbes comic. And it's the one where Calvin's father is explaining sunsets and where color comes from. Because, like, before the 50s, everything was in black and white, and his father was explaining, and Kelly was, oh my God, that is my dad. You always had to take an explanation by Mr. Saxton with a huge grain of salt and check your facts just in case. His goal, I think, was to get it close enough so it sounded true, but there was always something in there that you didn't want to repeat to your friends later because they would think that you were a very, very odd person, such as the world was in black and white way back when. So thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you for your time.
This is Cliff Marr, who is a brother to me, and evidently who Dad treated as if he should be treated like me. So that's good. Yeah, I think it went. The world before 1950 was in black and white, but they did invent color film. But since the world was in black and white, they were really color pictures of a black and white world until the world turned color, and then it was color pictures, color film. And you didn't want to repeat anything Dad said like that to a teacher, especially. Anyone else have something they'd like to add? Right? Tell them who you are.
I am Ryan, grandkid of Keith. I'm not much of a storyteller, but I do have lots of memories that I'll keep with me. Up in the house. Oh, it felt like every summer. It probably was only 2 or 3 times, but you know, sent away from my video games and friends up the gorge. But we spent many summers painting the house, putting in the irrigation system, building a pond. It was suspicious that it was always late August when it was time to pick the cherries and the apples. I didn't really realize it then, but I think the one thing that I'll never forget is that it's soil and not dirt. And I hope you all will too.
Anyone else? Okay, then. Well, I think this really shows that we are who we are because of the stories that we create and the stories that we tell and the stories we share. This last thing I'll say is that there was a time 15, maybe more years ago when I told my parents that I was telling stories professionally. And they both looked at me and said, "Storytelling? Where did you get that?" Which I found particularly hilarious because I can tell you where I got that. I got it from sitting on the porch of my grandparents, hearing my grandfather and my dad telling stories hardly without drawing a breath for a whole afternoon. I heard it when we walked out to the old ranch, and I heard detailed descriptions of every building and piece of equipment that was gradually melting into the ground out there. I heard it in family gatherings with his brothers, where it seemed like there was really only one story, but it was really thousands that just led one into the other, into the other, into the other. That's where I learned what we are and the stories that we share and their importance. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to have one more piano song, and then we'll organize ourselves for the internment at the cemetery. That's the word we're looking for. And I hope you'll join us there. So, final song.
Good job.
Thank you very much for everyone who is here. And I also want to say thank you so much to Dad's younger brother, Bill, and Aunt Margie, and all of our friends and family who could not be here today, but who are watching with us and with us in heart and spirit. Thank you so much for all your kind words and letters.